So let's go ahead and get into the user interface for our game. So what we're going to be creating is a lives display where we'll display how many lives the player has. We'll create a score display which will keep track of how many enemies we destroy. And then we'll also go ahead and create our title screen and create logic to where when we hit the P key for play, we can start the game or whatever key you'd like it to be. So let's go ahead and take a look at our sprites folder here. Inside your sprites folder, you'll find a folder called UI, which stands for user interface. And inside here, we have a lives folder. This is how our lives are going to be displayed. You can think of this as sort of like if you've ever played Zelda. Okay, so in Zelda, they have like the heart system, and the hearts kind of disappear. And when one heart disappears, it has that grayed out shade. That's exactly what we're creating here. So we have 3 lives in our game, and when you have only 1, it's going to show 1 with 2 grayed out. So we're going to create logic for displaying the appropriate 1. So this is kind of the magic trick of how that's done. Essentially, what we'll do is we'll have this no lives method here. Oh, I'm sorry, this no lives image here. And we're just going to be updating this sprite based on how many lives our player has. So what do we do to get started here? Let's go ahead and position where we want this to be. Go ahead and right click in the hierarchy, go to UI, go to image. This is automatically going to create a canvas. The canvas is the area that all UI elements should be inside. The canvas is just a game object that holds all of your UI elements as children. So you'll also see that it also gave us an event system, and this is used for messaging, which we're not really going to cover that much in this course. But if you're interested in learning more about the canvas, definitely check out the docs for the manual on the UI canvas at unity3d.com. So here's what we have. We have a canvas here that's going to house all of our images, or all of our on-screen elements for the user interface. We have this image here. Let's go ahead and rename this and call it Player Lives. And you'll see here that we have an image component. We can change the color of this square, or we can give it a source image. Go ahead and drag the no lives source image to it. And you'll see here that it updates to that image. We can also drag in the 3 lives, and it updates just as well. Okay, so what I want to do here is we're going to choose in the scene view where we want to position this. You can see this square here. This is our canvas. So the square is our canvas. This is where basically your screen overlay for your entire user interface lives. So you can actually drag within this square, and your image will be on screen, as you can see here. So where you guys want to position this, you're more than welcome to position it wherever you want. I'm going to go ahead and position this in the top left corner here. And I'm going to go ahead and get it right about there. Pretty happy with that spacing. You're more than welcome to get it however you see fit though. And once you have it there, go ahead and set it to what the game starts with. So for instance, we start with 3 lives. So your source image should be 3. And what's going to happen now is when we get hurt, we're going to say, okay, let's update the UI display. We no longer have 3 lives, we now have 2 lives. So we're going to be changing out the source image for 2 lives. And you can see here that it happens as if you naturally just removed one. But really all the magic is we're doing an image swap, and it happens so quickly that the naked eye can't even pick it up. So if we go to 1 life, we go to 1, and then eventually we'll have no lives and it's game over. And then we'll be able to press the R key to restart. And when we do that, we'll go back to 3 lives. So where does all this magic happen? How do we control all of this? We're going to have a user interface manager called a UI manager. And this script has one job only, and its job is to manage the display of your game, the update display. So you can think of it as the HUD, heads up display. All it's going to do is update our UI. So let's go ahead, right click, create a new C# script, and let's go ahead and call it UI manager. Now we're going to need to house this somewhere. So just like our spawn manager, how it sort of just sits on an empty object in the scene, we're going to do the exact same thing with our canvas. Now, typically what you'll find is some people actually use their canvas to house the UI manager, and that's perfectly fine. Or you can actually create a new object by going to Create, create empty, or Control-Shift-N for PC, Command-Shift-N for Mac, and you can drag it on there. I actually like the idea of using our canvas since it has to be in the scene anyways and it controls all of our UI elements. It makes more sense for me to have it on the canvas. So go ahead and drag your UI manager on top of the canvas. Now we have a UI manager component attached. Go ahead and open that script up. And let's go ahead and look at the logic for how we're going to update our display. Alrighty, so we're inside the UI manager. Now, the only responsibility for the UI manager is to handle the update of our display. So let's go ahead and treat this as a blueprint for what the UI manager is. I'm going to go ahead and remove void start and update. We may add them back later, but for now, just to create a blueprint of what the UI manager is responsible for, let's go ahead and actually write out its program like a blueprint. So for instance, the UI manager can do what? We can update our display. So we'll have a method that we can call from our player when we get hurt that says update lives. So to do that, we'll say public void update lives. And then what's another thing that our UI manager is going to do? We're going to have a score, right? So every time we destroy an enemy, they'll make a call to the UI manager, and they're going to call our method called public void, we'll say update score. And is there anything else we're missing? We're going to update our live, we're going to update our score. And I think for the most part, that's pretty much it. One thing our UI manager is going to be responsible for, how can it update the lives? You saw that in order to update the lives, we're swapping out those sprites. Our program needs to know what those sprites are. So we're going to have a variable for those sprites. So here we can go ahead and say, and this is really important too before we start, notice that it was an image component, and what we were working with here on that image, if we click on the player lives here, it's an image component and we're changing the source image, which takes a sprite. So I'm going to have a variable of type sprite because I want to be able to hold one of these sprite game objects. So let's hop back over to our script. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a variable here called sprite. So public sprite, and we'll go ahead and say public sprite, we'll go ahead and call this, we can say no lives, whoops, public sprite no lives image. And then we can, you can create another one that would be public sprite one live, one life image, and so forth. Now you may see that. Now you may be thinking this is a little repetitive and redundant. And imagine if you actually had a game where you had 100 lives and you had 100 sprites. Would it make logical sense to create 100 variables here? Absolutely not. So what I want to introduce you guys to is an array. An array is a fixed list that contains some sort of data structure. And basically what we can do is we can have one variable that contains all of our elements, all of our sprites, and we can access those sprites when we need to. What's great about this way of doing it is that we can access an array by an index, and that index can correspond to our lives. So how do we declare an array? In order to declare an array, which again is just a fixed list, like a fixed size list, we can go ahead and say public sprite, which is our data type, and then to make it an array, we use the square brackets. And then every variable still needs a name, so public sprite, we'll go ahead and call this sprites, or maybe we'll say lives. And go ahead and just add a semicolon. Save your script, head back over to Unity. Okay, and you'll see here if we click on our canvas and you look at your UI component on the UI manager, we now have this little drop down called lives. This is our array, and we can set the size of this array. So we have 4 images, no lives, 1, 2, and 3. By doing that, you'll see here that we have essentially we have 4 types of 4 variables to store information in. So we have one variable that stores 4 items of type sprite. So that's how arrays work. It's pretty nifty tool to have. So let's go ahead and populate this. And what I want to do here is we're going to correspond these numbers, the order in the list, to the amount of lives the player has. So for instance, if element 0, when the player has 0 lives, that's what we're going to use for no lives. When the player has 1 life, we're going to use element 1. Same goes for 2, and I'm just dragging and dropping them directly into these element holders here. Element 3, 3. So now the question comes, how do we access these individual elements such as element 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4? We have an array variable called lives that holds 4 sprites. How would I access the first element, which is 0? Well, it's pretty easy. I would basically go ahead and say lives, which is our array, the variable name we called the array, and I would use the array brackets to index it. So 0 would get me the first image, 1 would get me the next, 2nd would get me the third, and 3 would get me the last one. Now you might be wondering, why is it starting at 0? Because in programming, all numbers start at 0. So everything is indexed at 0. So 0 is the first element, 3 is the last element. When someone asks you the size or length of the array for lives, the length is 4. However, the elements are 0, 1, 2, 3, as that's 4 digits. So this is how we access those individual sprites, which we'll be using momentarily. So here we have our variable for sprites. And give me 1 second here, my indenting is a little out of whack here. Okay, perfect. All right, so we have all of our lives, and we have our blueprint for how this is going to function. We have an update lives method, which we'll call, and then we also have an update score method, which we'll call. Now, typically when you're creating manager classes should not communicate with other scripts. Instead, other scripts, such as our player, such as our enemy, they should communicate with us, the UI manager. So here we have a problem. How do I know how many lives the player has? For instance, look at this. We say here, public void update lives. We know that we're going to be swapping out the current image source for one of these sprites, but how do I know which one? How do I know how many lives this player has? Well, that is where we have to get into custom functions or methods, such as update lives, but with parameter types and arguments where we can pass in data to this method. Similar to what you've seen us do with the onTrigger events and how it has a parameter in there called collider other, we can actually create our own custom parameter methods where we can request additional information. So when the player calls this update lives method, they're going to also include how many lives they currently have. So I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate custom methods for you in the next video.